So dear teacher, dear community, so we're blessed to still be on a retreat, to be in a container where we can cultivate our mindfulness, our concentration and insight, the 3 trainings that was mentioned on the first talk, and learn how to come together as a community, to support each other, to learn from each other, and we come from different places. Wouldn't it be for a mindfulness retreat, many of us would not spend time together. So this is a little bit radical, community building bridges from different communities, between different kinds of people, different backgrounds, different experience. So that is one of the elements of a retreat I appreciate a lot. And also living in community that I appreciate, to having to open my mind to more people's situation, because everyone doesn't come from the same conditions that I lived in before I came to the Sangha. And so I really enjoyed one of the questions from the session yesterday, and it was a question about how our society, where individualism is so strongly rooted and emphasized, if that can be an obstacle to receiving the practice of Buddhism that come from a more societies that have a more collective approach to things. And so as I was reflecting on this, the first thing that come to me is like, the Dharma is deep and lovely. We now have a chance to see, study and to practice it. So it's present for us to see, but it's also depending on our cultural lenses and values and ideas and habits. We might see certain things and feel attracted by certain things. And so I think that was one of the elements where I appreciate Thai focusing a lot on the mindfulness trainings. Because we've seen in different spiritual communities and also Buddhist ones in the past and the present, where there's not an ethical practice. Sometimes it causes a lot of suffering. We think we can be mindful, and when we're mindful we can do whatever we want. We're a meditator, we're not caught in form, and it can create a lot of suffering. So I think that is one of the shortcuts that we cannot maybe take in a society like this. So that is a gift that Thai has offered us, to keep emphasizing the mindfulness trainings. Another aspect that came to me, there's also an important practice, actually one of the paramitas, the perfection that help us cross to the other shore. We're chanting the insight that brings us to the other shore this morning. But generosity in Dharma is also one of these elements of practice that can bring us to the other shore. In many communities, in many countries, that is like an initial practice before meditation. So in a society where there's individualistic views and there's a sense that the consumer is right, I think an aspect of generosity, of offering our time, our energy and our resources to community, to good things, is also very valuable as a way of concretely practicing to kind of erode our sense of self a little bit, our sense of entitlement, our sense of, oh, I have this money, I gave this to you, so then I have right to receive a certain kind of product. It's a very unbeneficial state of mind if we enter the practice like that. We're just trying to get a tool or a technique to help us in our lives, but we're not ready to enter a spiritual path yet. So on our journey, 3 brothers journeyed from San Diego to Montreal, and we had to spend the night in New Jersey. And so the brothers in Blue Cliff, they contacted a family in New Jersey, as a family with 2 teenage children, and in Vietnamese American family. They never met any 3 of us, and they greeted us at their home as that we're like long lost relatives at like 12:30 at night. And they, the son let us take over his bedroom, and they start cooking, and the next morning they were offering tea and coffee and more food, and took us to the airport, and just such generosity and such naturalness of just like wanting to help and support. And so we encounter that a lot when we're traveling in Asia too. Especially I was struck in Indonesia when we travel. The lay friend take care of everything, our bags and boarding, and we just show up at where we're staying, and then our bags show up, everything. They take care of everything. And then after 3 months in a very privileged situation like that, we come back to the US, and then it's time to carry your own bag and drive your own car again. Which is also a beneficial aspect of practice, to keep our humility and our groundedness in life. It's also one thing that Thai wants us to train as monastics to keep cooking and cleaning and doing things, so we don't get an idea of only leading this or organizing that or giving a talk is what is beneficial, but like everything we do is beneficial. But this generosity, and there's also a beautiful teaching in the Dharma, the Cut Through Illusion Sutra, that I will share more about today as well. But there's one line that bodhisattvas practicing generosity does not rely on form or on signs. The value and the benefit of practicing generosity like that without relying on forms and signs is beyond measure. And so one element we can practice this, if we want to offer our time and energy to something, is not to see, okay, I'm the one giving here, and I'm giving this. And so there's still the notion of a transaction in our mind, that we're separated. And the one that's receiving, maybe then they should listen to us when we ask them to do this and that in the future, or offer the kindness back at least, So then there's still a transaction. It's not generosity. We're not giving anything freely yet. And so this line, it inspires me. And so when we're holding our alms bowl, one of the lines that we recite is that recognizing it is the bowl of the Tathagata. And the giver, the receiver, and the transmission are empty. They're all together. You cannot take one out of the other. And so how can we give something in a way that we offer it freely, and we're just feeling like it's a river that is flowing. It's just life circulating. It's not this self that giving this certain kind of a product or idea or time to another person or an organization, but it's just like life flowing. I think that could be an antidote for a commodified society. And another aspect I wanted to mention is that in the practice of community. In 2011, at the end of the retreat at Blue Cliff during a US tour with Thai, a group of us went to Thai's hut to say goodbye. We were venturing off on the first wake-up tour in the US, in the Northeast. And we planned a couple of weeks going to different college campuses and detention centers, and we also had planned to go to different cities to have both sitting and walking flash mob meditation in city centers. And as we came in and had a cup of tea with Thai, after a while Thai started sharing some instructions for us going out on the road. There's a group of us, maybe 7 monastics and a couple of wake up age OI or OI aspirants. And so Thai was lifted up his hand and wiggled the fingers on his hand. Tell us, okay, you have to see yourself as the fingers of one hand. I think he knew his students too, because I think that group that went out, all very capable, all very ambitious, and strong bodhicitta. And sometimes when we have that, we also want to push our view and we want to impose our ways. And so Thai encouraged us to see each other as the fingers of one hand. And how can we see the beneficial capacities of each finger? and not compare which one is the best. The pinky, does it really have any function or what? The thumb, I'm so great and strong and I can hold things. But to recognize those capacities, I think that is a training in an individualistic society. We're maybe used to having our own car, our own home, our own everything. So there's been fewer and fewer areas in our life where we actually have to collaborate with each other. We become a consumer, so we work hard to get our bank account filled up, and then we can use it in other places to get what we need. But what kind of collaboration is happening in that? How do we need to kind of get along in practice to collaborate and get along? Obviously in some profession it's much more pronounced than maybe others. But seeing that on the forefront of practicing as a community, that is also like a beautiful path and an antidote for some of the sufferings in our society of loneliness, of separation, of isolation. But also is maybe not easy. When I came in contact with and started practicing with other young people in India, I felt this great joy and so much determination and enthusiasm in my practice, because I was with a group of other young people from a little bit, mostly Europe, but they all wanted to practice. When I was home in Sweden practicing meditation for several years, apart from my mom, I felt quite isolated. No of my peers were interested. And so the aspect of community, and so how can we make our local sanghas also our friendships, our families, and not just come together when we sit and walk and have Dharma sharing and listen to some teaching, which is very important, but how can we organize a potluck now and then? How can we organize a community viewing of tomorrow? Remember tomorrow? Not today, but tomorrow documentary, or something that we feel would inspire our community. Just to kind of build more of a sense of a community and not just this one group that I belong to and that's what I do with them. And so as we met with Thai this Sunday afternoon, Thai also gave out instructions on how to practice in these flash mob meditations. It was at the height of the Occupy Wall Street movement. And so there was like tent encampments in Boston when we went there. Some of us went over and introduced the practice of mindful walking to them. And some came along, did walking meditation through the street of Boston to Copley Square where we had our flash mob meditation. But so to prepare us for that, Thai also shared like we don't sit for anything. We don't walk for anything. The peace is the sitting and peace is the walking. So we're offering our peace, we're offering our insight of interbeing, we're offering our joy as a community, we're offering our love and our compassion of wanting to relieve suffering. But we don't have to walk against anyone or for anything. So this is kind of the middle path that opens up. How can we act in a way that we contribute our energy, our insight to society, but is not getting caught in partisan conflicts. And so I think that is one inspiration for the title or the subtitle for this retreat is Go as a River, peacefully breathing and joyfully walking through times of great change, something like that. There's this spirit of sometimes we think for a certain progress or a certain transformation to happen, whatever means we use is okay, just because we have a high noble goal that we're striving for. So we think it's okay to use whatever means we can in the process of getting to something. But if we plant something and we want to grow corn, we really want to eat corn, but because maybe we're more used to planting wheat and maybe the wheat grows more easily and that is what people are used to growing, so we plant wheat. but we're hoping to eat corn. Right? So if we want to have a just, equal, a loving, inclusive society, and we're taking sides, and we're arguing, and we're trying to target the bad guys, what are the energy we're putting into the world? What are the seeds that we're nourishing? So I think for me that is the practice that Thai gave us. And it's really difficult. Yeah. Take a lot of aimlessness to practice that. So aimlessness, apranihita, means that we put something in front of us and then we pursue it to reach it. So there's a certain kind of craving, there's a certain kind of like expectation. It doesn't mean that we shouldn't have ambition and desires in our life, but how can they be wholesome? How can they contribute to beauty in the world? How can they contribute to goodness in the world? How can they contribute to truth in the world? Right? And then actually be diligent in going about that, to nourish ourselves, to be happy, supported by our own practice, the community practice, so we can continue doing the thing that we really care about. Not just for a couple of days each year, but like, how does this retreat continue when we go home? And so as a last aspect of this individualistic, corporate, competitive society, that I want to share is, I heard Thai give teachings to CEOs in the tech business, and in some other situations too, in Thai challenging and saying, you have to choose. You want to be number one, or you want to be happy? Because having this goal of putting in front of us and going towards, grasping, craving to be number one, we can never be at peace. We can never relax, we can never really enjoy what we have, because we're always striving for the next thing, or to keep staying on top. And so these are some of the ways how Buddha's teachings is revolutionary, very radical to the society we live in. And so the last 21-day retreat Thai offered in 2014, Thai talk a lot about right mindfulness. There's so much mindfulness out there. It's like we extract a little bit of protein enzymes from a soya bean, and then we make burgers, we make soy hot dogs and whatever. And so there's mindfulness. You could do with whatever, where just a little bit of awareness, and then, you know. But what happened with the path? What happened with the Four Noble Truths? What happened with right mindfulness? So I think that is what our community want to offer. There's a spiritual path. It's a path of an ethical path. And so a sniper, for example, have to be very concentrated. If they get distracted, they might lose their target, and like months of work have been lost. And they have to stay focused, and at a certain point, know exactly how to calibrate everything. It takes a lot of concentration. That's not the kind of concentration, is right concentration. It's not the kind of concentration that leads to insight, right? So what are the things that we're thriving for, that we're grasping for us to be happy? And how can we practice to be happy with what we have, the conditions that we have? Touching gratitude. And then from that space we can continue to let goodness, truth and beauty ripple out in society. want to continue to share a little bit about walking through times of great change. Well, I think we've seen great change as humans on this planet for a long time. The agricultural revolution starting 12,000 years ago or so in the Fertile Crescent in the Middle East is a huge shift and change of how we lived our lives. And give rise to all kinds of conditions that made us possible to big civilizations and big empires, and start to discover and to explore and to learn a whole new set of skills. And obviously the Industrial Revolution, with being able to get energy and get machinery to do a lot of the work that had been done manually up until then. Just 250 years ago, not even that, huh? Yeah. Great change. And our technological revolution. There's so many things around even that wasn't there when I was young. I remember going with my dad when I was maybe 10 to get the first, it was a 28-inch television set. It was like as deep as it was wide, something like that. It weighed like a ton. And a VHS player. At that point in time in Sweden, we had 2 television channels, public broadcasting channels. A lot has changed since then. And with IT and coming of AI and many things changed. But I think also with a sense of awareness of things, our collective awareness of also suffering that has been going on for a long time and has been suppressed and kept to the sides for a long time is coming up, because it's a time of great change. Maybe there's some kind of collective awakening wanting to happen. So we are starting to see the suffering caused by discrimination, and it started being spread and talked about in new ways and in clearer ways, whether it is based on racial discrimination and injustice and generations of oppression, whether it is discrimination and disagreement from different religious point of views or political views or gender identity, sexual identification. So these suffering when a minority is being oppressed or not understood and not valued is coming up. And so in the light of the mindfulness trainings of being aware of suffering as that way of offering us a way out, okay, maybe there's an opportunity here, and not just scary change or painful situations that we get reminded of, but maybe there's a potential for transformation. For us to come back to our capacity to generate compassion. So I think some of the contribution that Buddhism can make for 21st century American society, I think it can help break down the walls a little bit, preventing compassion from blossoming. And also as we're seeing things changing and the climate is changing, it's not the same climate now that it has been the last 12,000 years or so that we've been able to build our whole civilization on. Previous generations in Sweden, we didn't train to fight huge wildfires. Dealing with snow and cold conditions, okay, we've been trained for that. Maybe even some flooding. But when wildfires happened this summer on a huge scale, we got resources and planes and all kind of support from Central and Southern Europe to be able to deal with it, because maybe they have more training. They're also seeing like, okay, we cannot deal with this on our own. So sometime in the phase of great suffering, we also have to kind of let go of what is a business as usual and just help each other out, maybe in new ways. And we see that also on a personal level when there's catastrophes. And so how can we also pay attention to the beautiful thing happening in the midst of this terrible, great change that is causing a lot of devastation and suffering? But what are the things that actually is helping us to maybe break free from the prison of this consumeristic, individualistic society? I read recently that things have changed a lot too in terms of the medical field. So in the past, 5, 10, 20% or more of the population could be wiped out by these plagues. Well, there's different plagues going through Europe, or smallpox coming with the Europeans over to the Americas, kind of being one way of the genocide of the native people. And so now we sometimes hear these new plagues, these new viruses spreading. But what I read is that in most of the cases, it's maybe a couple of thousand people that get affected at most, and within a couple of years, it's like somehow under control. So that is a huge difference. So how, are we aware of that, the advancement we also have been making? And now we're over 7 billion people. We never had that many people on the earth before, so the complications of the human system in our society, our civilization that we live in, is unprecedented. We've never been in a complicated system like this before, with so many different things, and no one can really understand the whole thing. So we can come back to the Buddhist Genesis to say, this is because that is. This is like this because that is like that. So this also invites us into be a gardener, to cultivate. So for the corn to grow, we need to collect the corn kernels and to plant them and know how to care for them if we want to eat corn, right? We had some delicious corn here in Minnesota. And so I read that now it's much more likely that we will die from diseases such as diabetes and heart issues rather than these plagues. So that's an interesting shift. So actually the way we're consuming and eating is killing us rather than these dangerous viruses that we are so alarmed about. So this is, where are we putting our attention? Also in the digital era, our attention is big bucks. Where we put our attention makes companies being able to sell ads. And it seemed kind of convenient that we follow along by ads and news articles that seem to kind of fit with what we've been looking for in the past. But there's also these computer algorithms that keeps tracking us and being aware. So where do we put our attention? What are the things we're feeding outside of ourselves through our time and our energy and our attention? That is our power that we're giving away freely. And maybe giving away to the people and the places that actually we don't agree with. So this is something to look at as we're practicing mindfulness. Where is my attention going? And how long is it staying with it? And where do I put my attention? So it can be beneficial. And so I also read that it's much more likely these days that we die from suicide than being killed in violent crime or even by war combined. So that is a new kind of suffering. That is a new kind of challenge. In 2012, there was over 800,000 people worldwide committing suicide. Must be a lot of suffering behind that before you do something like that. Right? So how can we learn to embrace our emotions, to recognize that our emotion and our feelings are part of a stream that continue to flow? They're always changing. Our situation might be a desperate one, but it also has the nature to change. It's not a static one. So we don't know. So if we can train ourselves to be with what is painful, be what is scary, and not get caught by the big waves crashing on our shore, well, maybe we can learn something new. Maybe we'll find the way out through coming back to ourselves like that, through coming back inside. And so I promised to share a little bit more about the sutra on the diamond that cut through illusion. So I want to share about 4 notions that we're invited to look into. So as we have practiced stopping, meaning to calm, to relax, to still, to focus, a sense of natural focus, relaxed, and that also infused with the joy of just being alive. And then we can look deeply. There's clarity in us. So we can look at things that will not just perpetuate our daily thinking, our discursive thinking about things, our reasoning mind, but it will come down more deeply in our consciousness and we can see things. Maybe we can see things directly, more clearly. And so I wanted to offer these notions, 4 notions that's offered in the sutra. So it starts with self, the notion of a self. The next one is the notion of a person. You can also talk about this as human. The third one is living being. And the fourth is lifespan. So in looking into our idea and notion of the self, this morning, as we're listening to 3 Sons of the Bell, we were invited to come back to our true selves. So, meaning our non-self. Our reality of not being a separate self-identity, separate self-entity. And so when we're looking at this sense of self, so we have to ask ourselves, who do I think I am? When I talk about me, what is that? Is it my features? Is it my personality? Is it my name, the place I was born in? the activities I do. What is our sense of self? When I lived and worked in Stockholm, I think our sense of self was after you introduce just your name, people would start asking, where do you work? Where do you live? And after that, pretty much you know if you want to keep talking with a person or not. It's pretty rough society, huh? Yeah, you always have to kind of prove yourself or try to fit in. And so what are the things that we identify with as self, as me? And so the teaching can be like a snake. If we want to catch a snake and we catch it by the tail and hold it up, it can turn back and bite us. So we have to be skillful when we apply the teachings and the practices, just like we're talking about bringing Buddhism to the individualistic society, right? Can easily misconceive the practice and use it for things that seem to, work for us, that just promotes our own cycle of ideas and notions. And so I remember one time a brother, he asked Thai in a kind of informal setting, so Thai, if I don't have a self and there's no body, do I still have to take off my clothes when I take a shower? I just shake his head and look at it. So in the Buddhist practice, we talk about the historical dimension and the ultimate dimension. So there is a person here, there is someone here that so please remember your birthday and, don't throw your passport away. And, so in that, that realm of conventional designation and the historical, life where there's up and down and there's past and future, we have to kind of have some kind of grounding in who we are as well. But in a more ultimate sense, can we look into who we are in the sense of seeing ourselves as a river? We talk about our 5 skandhas of our body, our feelings, our perceptions, our mental formation, and our consciousness as rivers, a stream that keep flowing. They're not stagnant, they keep flowing. And they've been flowing for a long time. Before I was born, they've been flowing. Through my parents, the society I grew up in, and so many things, human evolution on this planet for millennia, right? So it continues to flow. So that's why it can be so interesting to be aware of our breathing, relaxing our body, and creating this space as we're sitting to just see what comes through our mind, what comes through our feelings, and just to observe them in that spirit of, they're coming and going. They stay for a while and they continue on. So they're impermanent. And actually, I'm not the only one that have fear. I'm not the only one that have grief, suffering, and anger, jealousy, whatever it might be coming through, comparison, complaining. This is not me. This is not just mine. We can maybe explore also, where does this come from? Where has this habit developed? Is it in my life? Is it earlier on? I told a couple of brothers recently that I lost my appetite for adventurous, dangerous sports when I was about 4 years old. I had prepared my 3-wheel bike at the top of a hill at our house, and it was a good downhill stretch, and I was getting ready to jump on. My grandmother comes out and says, no, stop. Maybe it was helpful, I don't know. It's difficult to remember how steep that hill was. But that love and that care and that maybe worry of wanting to preserve my well-being, it did make a deep impression on me. So I changed who I am and what I engaged in afterwards. Yeah. It was shortly after I came to Deer Park, we saw a documentary that was based on Jared Diamond's book, Guns, Germs and Steel. How many of you have read that book? And I later read the book too. Very interesting. So he's a professor at UCLA, and he spent a lot of time in Papua New Guinea observing tropical birds. And as he spent time with indigenous people there, he saw how humorous they were, how smart they were, how much they collaborated with each other, how creative they were, how hardworking they were. And one day, one of the leaders asked him, how come the white man has so much cargo, meaning stuff, equipment, and the Papua New Guineans have so little? And so, he surprised himself of reflecting on it, I don't know, I don't really understand and know this. So he studied it to look into how come. And so what he found out is basically this is because that is. This is like this because that is like that. Examining the kind of plants, the kind of animals that was available in the Fertile Crescent area when agricultural revolution started. Those animals to both milk, but also to use to plow and to help carry things. But also many of the seeds and the legumes that could be grown, they were easy to propagate, and they could kind of continue to transform them. So because of the kind of plants and animals that was available, the agricultural revolution can grow quickly and strongly in that area just because of the conditions. And so then that gives rise to bigger civilizations where more people can spend their time and energy doing different things. And so the Guns, Germs and Steel title goes from with this civilization of being able to specialize. You find ways of using materials in new ways, making steel for tools and so on, so you can be even more effective or destructive, whatever, however you want to express it. And you can start making weapons to get your way with things. But also new germs got developed, and we got resistant to certain germs and certain diseases just because we're living close to animals on the farms. So slowly we have a kind of a different kind of resistant to some diseases that people in other parts of the world that got exposed as the Europeans start colonializing left and right, and west and east and south and north. And so because of these three things, guns, germs and steel, a big part of the world could be colonized by the Europeans. Because there was a certain kind of plant, there was a certain kind of animals available in that region. And so when you look at the kind of plants and animals that were available in Papua New Guinea, it was quite natural that there's a hilly island, there's not a lot of flat space, but also the way they get their carbohydrates and their protein is very labor intensive. It's difficult to cultivate those kind of grains or those kind of plants. And so he's just seeing, okay, just causes and conditions. And I was reading that and contemplating that. There was something in me thinking, it's like, oh, really? Somehow I thought European must be better in some ways, because how else could it look like this? Of spreading Christianity and Western or European culture all over the world, of kind of taking over vast areas of land, of oppressing millions of people on all continents, and just because of cause and conditions. So we can see here again, when we don't have an ethical dimension and of understanding who we are, and we start having these capacities of making steel, of making guns, of having all these kind of germs that everyone is not resistant to. It's a kind of a strength and a power if we don't know how to yield it with compassion and with understanding, but we're coming from craving and hatred. Wow, what devastation we can create. And so it also helped me to see that, okay, so there's no divine master plan here. We're just going along, things happen as they go along. So in that sense, it also makes it very difficult to find anyone to pinpoint and blame. It's your fault. It's your fault. When did this start? It's part of this stream, part of this river. And because of our ignorance, we created a lot of suffering for a lot of people. How can we release that? Because that is also a burden for ourselves, whatever group we're in. How can we release that and celebrate the joy of being with people we don't yet understand? So a little bit of reflections on how we can reflect on our sense of self. When it comes to our sense of person or a human being, we can also see we have a lot of misunderstandings, and there's a lot of views about who we are as human beings. Some feel like we've been put in charge of the rest of the planet, do whatever we want. That's kind of our divine mission, responsibility, or right. And it separates us from the planet. We don't realize that we are the planet, we are other people, we are the animals, we are the plants. Right? So this self-importance as human beings. And I think this is a very interesting topic to look at too when we talk about climate change and reports on possible destruction or impermanence of human civilization. So as I've been walking around here, I've been looking at the leaves and the wind and seeing, can I see myself in the wind? Can I see myself in the leaves, in the butterfly? And what is so special and great of being a human being? And we can do great things, but also what is the cost when we consider our own greatness to the expense of others, and we become caught in a kind of superiority complex as human beings. And so when we get caught in the complex of superiority, that humans are above nature, are separated from nature, we separate spirit and matter. And that's also not something new, It happened hundreds of years ago. Religion take care of spirit, science take care of matter, and then a lot of trouble follow. And so this is what we're rediscovering too. How can we touch that we are the earth, to fall in love with the earth again? The Thai invites us, if we cannot do that, we cannot offer any contribution to a solution or a transformation of the situation. We have to have a transformation at the base. There's this kind of separation from the planet and from other living things that make us cause so much suffering. And also, I think, make us suffer. So when we've been sharing about this, I say, I want to make people happy. I think eating more plants will make people happier. Eating less refined foods will make people happier. Spending less time at the computer, video games, and so on will make people happier. Learning how to build and do things out in nature will make people happier. Right? And so I read another book that really helped me also to look deeply. It was called Sapiens, Yuval Harari. And it's a similar approach, like asking these big questions and then looking into different scientific fields to explore how things are the way they are. And so he asked himself, how come a couple of 100,000 years ago, Homo sapiens was at the middle of the food the food chain? Yes, thank you. We hunted. We also did a lot of foraging, but we also got hunted and had to try to survive attacks from predators. And so when he looked into this, the solution is also not that great. It's not because it was meant to be, or because humans are so great. So these conditions that he found was, so humans, just like ants and termites and bees, can collaborate in great numbers, or in bigger numbers than any other mammal. So we can collaborate in big numbers. But we can also collaborate in a much more flexible and dynamic way than the bees and the ants can do. So similar to some primate and some dolphin and so on, we can be very flexible in our collaboration. So if you put 50 chimpanzees in a room, or 150 like this, the scenario will be different. You know? And so we can collaborate enough to agree on when to listen and when to share, when to sit and stand up and all these. There's a lot of collaboration happening, right? And so because of that we can learn new things and we can give each other an opportunity to be together in ways that chimpanzees cannot. And we can continue this kind of complexity of things because we have the capacity that is different from the ants or the bees. And then the third reason he found that we can agree on abstract concepts. So in our current day and age, we're agreeing that there's kind of there's dollars and we use dollars for certain things. We're kind of agreeing that that kind of economy is like there and is functioning somewhat. You know?